afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us for today's Coresight Conversations Innovator Intelligence. Today we have two guests, Navjit Bhasin, founder and CEO of Newmine, and Michael Relich, COO of PacSun-Eddie Bauer. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our host, Deborah Weinswig.
Thanks, Anna. Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to our Innovator Intelligence webinar series with Newmine. For those of you who don't know the company, Newmine is really taking hold of the current returns challenges that many retailers face. They're uniquely focused on helping retailers build a better bottom line through retail commerce optimization and real returns reduction. For those of you who've seen Navjit speak, he talks about this chief returns officer, which I think is the idea of the future of retail. So to give you a little bit of background, in 2011, Navjit founded Newmine as a consulting and technology firm with a mission to help retailers build a better bottom line, which we all want. They're uniquely focused on optimizing retail commerce, and the Newmine team is comprised of a seasoned retail, basically group of transformation experts. They focus on digital transformation, organization management, operations optimization, and M&A to drive their clients' profitability. I am your host, Deborah Weinswig, and I'm honored to be joined by my good friends, Navjit Bhasin and Mike Relich. So to give you a little bit of background on Navjit, he is a visionary expert in strategy, technology, operations, and change management. As a veteran entrepreneur and an active angel investor, he has worked in hands-on roles for global retailers and consumer brands. He really does have a keen eye for creative ways to fund growth initiatives and increase profitability. And for me personally, he's always been there to really have a great conversation to bounce ideas off of. So I really appreciate it. And then with Mike Relich, I've known Mike for many years, and he has an impressive retail track record. I first met him when he was the CIO of Wet Seal, way back when. He then joined Guess as CIO and took his insights from this role to help transform the company in his COO role. As he broadened out his retail experience, he joined Crate & Barrel, then Lucky Brands, and now at PacSun-Eddie Bauer, all in the COO role. PacSun-Eddie Bauer is very lucky to have him, in my opinion. We are very honored today to have both Navjit and Mike with us. So today we've got a few topics we want to cover, and then we'll dive into a little bit more details depending on the questions that we receive from the audience. We're going to talk about how retailers can find focus given the new realities of the industry, how they can reimagine the new seasonal calendar and data-driven merchandising, and really identifying the omni-channel capabilities that are essential to recovery. As always, we'll have a video available on our site in 24 hours. Lastly, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, even during our conversation. If you would like to ask questions, I'll try and fold them in. And with that, let's get started. Mike and Navjit, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Deborah, for having me.
So to get started, let's talk about, in the short term, how should retailers prioritize to set themselves up for success in this new retail landscape?
Well, I could speak from the PacSun-Eddie Bauer perspective and to all the people I know in the industry. Basically, with your stores closed and e-commerce, the only thing that's bringing in cash flow, the biggest issue is cash flow, and inventory equals cash flow. So really, the priority has to be, how can you drive e-commerce or digital sales? And what's happened to a lot of retailers is when the stores closed, they ended up canceling all their orders for summer goods. So now you've got a whole group of stores that are sitting there with aged inventory. So how do you take that inventory and convert it into cash? And then also, how do you control expenses? Because these are the two biggest challenges I think people have with all the brick and mortar stores closed.
Have you seen any interesting ways in terms of how retailers have reduced expenses, and are they getting more efficient?
Yes, I mean, I can speak of my own experience. Basically, unfortunately, we had to furlough a large portion of the company, and it's not unique. I think every other retailer did that, but our e-commerce volumes have grown significantly. And what we did is, even in our DC, we had to practice social distancing. So that limited the number of people that we could have shipping goods. Plus, we knew that with the stores having a substantial amount of inventory locked up, what we did is we actually took a store manager and put them in about half of our stores and had them shipping e-commerce orders. So now about 45% of our e-commerce orders are actually shipped from stores. So a store manager comes in and they pack orders all day. And even though the store's closed, they have access to the store. FedEx picks up our orders. And this has enabled us to actually leverage that inventory. And what we've also done, which I think was kind of interesting, is we've taken stores in proximity, and we have a store manager going to one store in the morning, shipping goods, and then going to the store, another store in the afternoon to ship goods. This way we can balance out that inventory, across the store chain without having to drive a whole lot of expense.
Great. Navjit, what have you seen?
Well, I think, like Mike said, the key thing is really generating cash at this time when every retailer is sitting on a lot of inventory, which is just aging with the time. And I think one of the other key things is, how do you do more with less? And what I mean by that is, hey, employees are furloughed. I don't have, staff in the stores or in the DC at this point in time, but whoever is available, how do I make the best productive use of them? At the end of the day, it's really about getting cash in hand at this moment. And just this morning, we all heard about the first bankruptcy due to COVID. So I'm sure there are more to come, but everybody's keeping their fingers crossed. It doesn't really go way too bad.
Can I ask you a follow-up to that? So, and I agree, we're probably starting to see the beginning of some of these COVID bankruptcies, and I think we probably will for quite some time. With that inventory potentially, kind of hitting the market at an unexpected time for other retailers, how do they handle the glut from a competitive perspective, and how do they, find success in a very challenging environment if they're competing with someone who's, kind of running a inventory liquidation sale?
Well, again, what's really going to make or break it at this point of time is going to be, before you push that inventory down into the liquidation channels, the more you can sell through your own stores is how you're really going to get some profitability of the inventory that you already purchased. Because see, once you send it over to the other marketplaces or the off-price retailers, you've already written off 60-70% of the margin.
Yeah.
And then,
No,
the future shipments are also being squeezed. You may not be getting the new inventory, let's say within the next few weeks or months. And I think as the malls, the stores start opening up, starting this week, time will tell. How do the consumers start reacting to the reopening? Are they really going to be flooding the malls, which I don't think is going to happen, but even if we start getting 20% of the store traffic back, it is going to start generating some cash and move that inventory.
Mike, we've seen some different approaches by different companies. So some retailers, right, who were able to, kind of canceled orders as it related to summer, and are getting new deliveries, fresh deliveries, let's say either right for back to school, or even kind of writing off back to school and just focusing on holiday. Others we've heard are packing away spring 20 merchandise to bring it out spring 2021. So this idea that there are disruptions throughout the supply chain for quite some time. What have you seen kind of makes the most sense in this very confusing environment?
Well, cash flow is paramount. So for the companies who have the balance sheet, who could pack things away for next spring, power to them. But I think for a lot of people, you need the cash. And looking at analytics, what's interesting for us is that margins really haven't been depressed. So we find out the desirable goods still sell. And I think what's really important here is to go and look at your customer cohorts, look at who your best customers are, and basically reach out to them. And desirable merchandise is still desirable merchandise. And then find the merchandise that isn't turning and figure out how to a way to liquidate that. And now, you brought up a very interesting point, because basically every retailer I know canceled all their summer orders. And that's put tremendous pressure on the supply chain. So now you've got all this, if you're a brand, you stuck with these goods, you're going to liquidate them in the off-price channel. I think everyone's going to go there. There'll be a glut of inventory. And then, going with the supplier, it's kind of like Russian roulette, or who do you know is going to be in business, and will you get shipped? So you really have to look at your supply chain and say, well, who's reliable, and who do I think is really going to deliver on those future orders? Because
that's a great point. I haven't heard anyone talk about that.
Well, I think that's very concerning to us, because our suppliers are suppliers to all the other retailers, and not only did we cancel, everyone else canceled, and the pressure is being put on them. in terms of, they're sitting on raw materials, excess inventory, et cetera. And it's, so part of our challenge is to figure out who's going to be the last man standing.
Definitely. And what, Navjit, as you're talking to retailers, what data are they looking at to make these decisions? Because there's so many decisions that need to be made. I think it's hey, it's overwhelming for all of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
But picking out those pieces of data to help them make the best decisions, what are you saying?
So Deborah, one of the concepts that even about 2 years ago we had been talking when we launched our platform was, the retail to consumer transaction is not committed till the returns are committed. And, it's really going to boil down to what is the customer keeping at the end of the day? Obviously there is going to be demand, but what is that going to be kept by the consumer and doesn't come back into the retailer supply chain, which again adds a lot of cost back to the retailer. And I think especially in these times, the lower retailers can keep the costs. It's going to help them with the profitability. And I think Mike, you said it correctly. It's whoever is going to survive this is going to be, doing pretty well, because we will definitely see a lot of casualties out of this.
Definitely. Mike, as you're making some of your decisions, what data are you looking at to figure out, kind of just how to continue to operate?
Well, there's some challenges here because, normally you would look at your ERP system, I'd look at what styles are turning and what are my best sellers, et cetera. But the problem is I don't have all my stores open. So I have pockets of stores where we're shipping goods, other stores, we don't have access to the inventory. So it puts a challenge there to say, okay, well, what are the best performing styles? And then on top of it, we say, well, if we know these styles are turning in a certain group of stores and we have inventory of those styles sitting in other stores, how can we access that without driving up our operational costs? And that's where we're moving. To me, it's much more economical to move store managers than it is to move merchandise.
Yeah.
And then Navjit brings up a very valid point, which is also returns. Basically, we want to look at what is the net profitability of goods. And now knowing that, given the cash we have, we want to make sure that we invest it in the most profitable place. And where we're making the most profit, we have the fewest returns. And knowing that there's pressure on the supply chain, we want to make sure we make those bets on the most profitable vendors.
I have to say, when I originally met you, Navjit, somebody had said to me, probably a year before we met, we were destined to, said, returns is like this dirty little secret. And I think that, it happens to all, to all retail, but it's very challenging and how everyone deals with it. What are you seeing in terms of the conversation around returns and what's happening right now?
Well, Deborah, it's interesting, even in today's date, with all happening with the COVID, we are in active conversations with the retailers of all sizes and shapes about returns, because they know that all the sales that are happening right now, the returns are going to come back. Some of them are, extending their refund timelines rather than doing an instant refund because they want to hang on to the cash. They're extending their refund timelines. But see, what's going to happen? Let me get down at the basic, when you ask the question, right, what should the retailers be looking at? If you look at a granular level, what product, what categories are really being sold? What are the customers really buying? What products are they keeping? And imagine if you can get that data in real time based on what Mike said. That's what retailers need to be focused on. It's going to be, you got to be agile, you got to be flexible at this point in time. And this is when, we will see a lot of retailers really trying to look at their analytical systems and making decisions. Hey, is it helping me keep my business going? Is it helping me in the time of crisis or not? Because it's really about the data. Yes, you can be driving, top line sales to the website or driving customer to the store, but at the end of the day, it's all about unit economics, the product profitability.
It's interesting when we went through the last recession, right? We saw retailers, actually, I was surprised, very draconian measures around returns, right? You had 15 days, 7 days, and there was, and hey, I understand that like physical footprints are closed, but to me, right, retailers have been incredibly gracious and right, if anything, like you said, Navjit, they're extending the return period. Mike, why do you think we've seen such a difference between that time and now?
Well, I mean, I think now the returns, back then it was about cash. Then when the economy started getting better as a competitive tool, people started wanting to be customer service focused and extending return windows. But I think we're going to go back to basically limiting them. And just let's look at COVID-19 and the operational issues around returns. We're looking at things, the Chinese, they say ling jie chu, which is zero touch. So we're looking to implement zero touch returns, because when the customer comes in, we don't know if the garment is infected. I don't think there's enough science to really know how long the virus will last on certain surfaces. So we're talking about having bins where the customer can put them in the bin, and we return to them, and we give them their money back without touching it. And then do we wait 72 hours before we put that back in? Well, you can think about it. That hurts the cash flow. Operationally, it's very, very difficult. And right now, just even in shopping, we've opened a few stores and we have very limited coverage. And we've shut down the dressing rooms because the same thing. When someone comes in and tries on a garment, well, how long do you take it off the floor, and what do you do? So now we're saying, look, you just take the garment, which could drive returns. But the way I look at it is, from a cash flow perspective, we need to limit returns. And, because I don't need the operational expense, and plus, we need to keep the cash. And I think a lot of retailers who are going to be hurt financially from this crisis will adopt similar policies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's review all the poll questions have come in. So will you go into a mall for just returns the next few weeks? Actually, 1/3 said yes. So that's, right. Going back to my days in the department store space and covering them, I remember when somebody came in to do a return, you typically got a significant upside from your original sale. So it's always been something that they felt fairly positively about, but this is more than I would have thought. Second, do you feel comfortable shopping at a store in a mall with a mask, not knowing who the store associate is? 60% said yes. Where do you think that would have come out, Mike?
Well, I would think that to me, it doesn't surprise me, because, masks are really more for protecting others than protecting yourself.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
All right. What will be your intent for visiting a mall in the next few weeks? This is all pretty even. Window shopping, entertainment, about 1/3, purchasing, 43%, and other. I think that, right, it goes back to, Mike, what you had said earlier, right? When you see families kind of coming shopping, first of all, we're all spending much more time with our families. And, this idea of, right, like, we're all stir crazy, want to get out and have some kind of entertainment. Is that, kind of what you would have expected, this idea between window shopping and purchasing?
For me, I would assume it'd be much more purchasing, because well, maybe I'm the wrong demographic, but I look at my own purchasing. The only time I go to stores now is with purchase intent. Mm-hmm. And, I would think that now, with social distancing and having to limit the amount of traffic I can have in the stores, the corollary there is I want to make sure that my conversion rate is very, very high to make up for the lack of traffic. And it would just assume to me that there would be purchase intent. But to your point, the cabin fever maybe is the other point that we haven't considered.
Definitely. And then, is your organization capable of real-time data analysis and taking action given the uncertain times when the historical data trends may not be relevant? This is a question we've gotten asked a lot, and it's right down the middle in terms of 50-50. Navjit, where would you have expected that to be? And what have you heard in terms of, right, the past right now is not going to predict the future. So mm-hmm. How do we think about data?
I'm actually surprised with the response. I thought about 1/3 were going to say yes, but it's good to see that nearly half are saying yes, which shows the confidence in the retailers at this point in time. And I think, again, what happens is in the times of crisis, everybody's got to get creative. And, to Mike's example, leveraging their stores to ship from store. And I think there is a big lesson that the whole retail industry is going to learn from how grocery adapted to the delivery and, pick up at curbside. within a short span of a few weeks, every grocer out there was able to, make that capability available. Whereas, some retailers had been thinking about it, planning for it, and was still not able to do it over a number of years. So again, I think it's, when there's fire in the belly and, innovation happens and people get creative, and even, some of them did it pretty frugally, but it worked. May not be perfect, but, like they say, let great not be the enemy of good.
No, it's been pretty impressive how quickly people have worked. I mean, Mike, have you found your organization to be more agile?
We're definitely more agile. And, our technology isn't standardized across the brands. We just launched BOPUS for PacSun, and we actually launched it last week. And
oh, wow.
It was, and we've already, it's been successful in the pilot stores, and we expanded it to 18 more stores, today. But the whole thing is, if it's a strip mall store, yeah, curbside is easy. But if it's a mall store, I mean, with limited, with limited labor, do I really want to send somebody out a half mile to the parking lot, or do you do store side pickup? We're trying to work through those challenges. And then with Eddie Bauer, we don't have the capability, but we're looking to take phone orders, call the store, and we'll do it for you. So the point is, let's leverage what we have and let's get creative, because, if we don't, we know we'll be left behind. Now, it's really interesting about the real-time data here, because I think a lot of retailers have maybe real-time POS data, but do they really have that data, aggregated and into a form where they can actually gain the insights immediately and take immediate actions? So that's where I see a lot of retailers actually struggling. Do you get those real-time insights immediately, and are you able to translate those into actions? And I'm not so sure every company is in that spot.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. All right, last poll question. What will your organization do with returns in light of the new realities presented by COVID? So extending return windows, once again, almost 40%, which is surprising and great. Allowing returnless refunds, 5%. Designating more products for final sale. That's actually been my advice for a lot of people. That's just 15%. And then 43% said no change in our process. Navjit, what would you have expected?
Well, I would have expected the last one, no change in the process, to be much less, because again, the consumer behavior has changed in the last 8 weeks that we know of.
Yeah.
People, are a lot more going on to the social media, reading the product reviews. And again, I think it's all about, let's not try to go back to the normal that wasn't really profitable for the retailers, right? And I think this is the time we should really think harder and deeper and say, hey, where do we want to be in let's say the next 3 years from now? Because retail, as we all know, was bleeding.
Yeah. And
it's a time we got to take action versus trying to go back to the previous normal, which was like I said earlier, bleeding slowly.
No, definitely. All right, I'm going to ask one more question, and then we've got a lot coming in from the audience. And if you have any other questions, please just use the Q&A chat at the bottom of your screen. Okay, so long term, what do you think will be critical to a retailer's ability to survive? That's a tough one. Mike, let's start with you.
I think you're going to have inventory management is going to be key. Basically making sure, you manage working capital and you're able to have quick turns. And to do that, your omnichannel capabilities are going to have to be really, really built out, along with good marketing data. I think you're going to have to look at who your best customers are and really deal with those cohorts. I mean, so to me, those are going to be probably the two biggest drivers.
Navjit, what do you think?
Well, I think it's really going to be about data. And even though in the last decade, we've been hearing every retailer wants to be a data company, but have they really become a data company? I can bet you if we did a poll right now, only 10% would say they really are, right? So yeah. What does it really mean? Hey, let's get down to the basics. The basics for retailers, the IP for retailers, the marketing and the merchandising. And how do you really make retail profitable is really understanding not only the customer, like Mike is saying, right, but even about product itself. How do you really, learn from the real-time insights coming from the customer and take it all the way back into the supply chain? And there are absolutely, analytics, data insights available, but for the most part, they are so siloed, they are not shared across the whole spectrum of not only retailer, but I would say the retail ecosystem, because no retailer stands alone. It's their vendors, their manufacturers, and their, suppliers as well. Like, hey, if somebody is doing, ad campaigns via Facebook or Google, the whole ecosystem has to be able to share those insights so everybody grows together.
And actually, Navjit, I agree with you. And I think that it's not just merchandising. To your point, it has to move back to the supply chain because we need to be much quicker. I don't think people can, these long lead times have to shrink.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting around that, Mike. We've seen a lot of inbound questions to Coresight around 3D design, virtual showrooms, things that we've talked about and, kind of somewhat pie in the sky, but the technology's there. But we are now seeing kind of in this time, retailers, and their partners are really looking to make some changes and make them really quickly, right, in real time, which it's great to see. And, there is, I mean, this is one of the things we've communicated to many startups and large tech companies. I mean, retailers are willing to spend. It's just a matter of them figuring out kind of what their, kind of biggest return, biggest ROI is going to be, and where do they start, which is, why I asked the question. All right, so I want to go over to our audience Q&A, and we'll start with Mike. With the pressure on costs and personnel, will you have the resources to really do the analysis on net profitability by product line, store, and brand?
Well, I don't think we have a choice not to, because basically where we just, inventory is our biggest source of work, or biggest use of working capital. And we have to make sure that, as we try to manage our cash, that we put our investments in the right place. And I think tools like Chief Returns Officer or similar products basically will allow you to actually do that analysis. I mean, we're not going to do it in spreadsheets, with a data warehouse and like the old days. It's going to be an automated tool that will give you those real-time insights.
Mike, can I take it a step further?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Sure.
What if those insights were actually brought to you either in your inbox or somebody whispered in your ear, go take this action? Given all the furloughs that have happened right now, and I'm sure, every retailer is struggling to, hey, you can get the insights, but how do you really take the action to make the impact of those insights? I think that's what's going to be the key of, taking actions and let the machines do the heavy lifting analysis and bring you the data and the insights you really need to make a decision.
Well, exactly, because I mean, so much in my retail career, I've seen, what I call the data diarrhea, people poring over data and making no decisions and no actionable decisions. So you're right. Now everybody's going to be looking to downsize, and I think the labor it has to be smart labor, and we have to use the machines, like you say, to do the heavy lifting and recommend the action. And we need to be quicker in taking those actions.
This is a great question for all. If you can't reduce returns, what are some best practices for limiting the operational expense of reverse logistics?
Well, I think, a lot of times with, in the retailers I've been involved in, we have our normal line, then you have e-com exclusives. And the answer before was, when e-com exclusives were returned to the store, let's go ship them back to the DC. And, I mean, to me, the merchandise ages, you have the freight costs, the handling costs, and I think liquidating in place is one answer. The second answer is looking at your order management system and getting sophisticated where, look, it might be an e-com exclusive, but if I see that item in a store, even if I have split shipping, it's cheaper for me to fulfill from a store and get rid of that item and then send it back to a DC. So I think between those two items, there's definitely ways to minimize cost.
Great. All right, next question. What is the longer term impact of returns post-COVID? I'm just thinking about holiday 2020.
Well, as we've all seen over the last nearly 2 decades now, e-commerce has really grown a lot, and it is going to keep on growing. And just in the last 8 weeks, I think every retailer's e-com was doing much, much better than planned, at least for most of them. And what that really means is the returns are going to be following at the same pace. So returns aren't going to slow down. The customer expectation of, hey, I'm going to buy, multiple sizes or multiple styles to try it at home. And in fact, Deborah, what might also happen is even with the pickup at the curbside, hey, customers can't try it on. They're probably going to order multiple sizes as well. So it's not going to reduce return. It's in fact going to increase return.
Yes, no, you're exactly right. And I think that the challenge around some of the, some of this kind of thinking through returns is just, everyone expects everything, I think, for the most part, to go back to the way it was. But obviously with significant increase, I believe a lot of it will stay. I mean, I've talked to many retailers, and Mike, actually, I'd love to get your opinion, right? We've seen huge upticks in e-commerce. Some retailers more on the staple side think they'll keep about half of it and give half of it back. What's your estimate in terms of, you don't need to give me exact percentages, but how much of that do you think you will keep?
Well, it's interesting because our e-commerce has, I can't say the numbers, but it's been phenomenal. And so far, we really haven't seen an uptick in returns. And I think what's going to be interesting is, traditionally, a lot of our e-commerce returns were made in the store channel. So when the stores open, I think we'll get the first glimpse. Now, the initial stores we've opened for PacSun, we haven't seen an uptick in returns, but it's been a small sample. But I imagine that we will see an uptick. And, the problem that you have in apparel stores, we've actually shut down our dressing rooms. And so, obviously there's problems having people try on goods and how long do you take them off the floor. So we've said, look, we're not going to do that. And, so we think that will drive actually much higher returns. But in terms of in e-commerce, obviously if people shift to that channel, I think it's inevitable you see more returns. And I think that's really, it's much more important to find out what are the real drivers of those returns and see how to minimize it. I mean, I remember when I was at Lucky, I would look at our return rate and I'd think, wow, if I could just cut it down for 10%, that would be 2% of comp increase. And what would we do for 2% comp increase? And just full disclosure, I did use Chief Returns Officer for that, and it was a phenomenal tool.
Thanks, Mike.
Sorry.
So there's a ton of questions coming in, Mike. Mike, you talked about suppliers, survival of the fittest, and focusing on those that are most reliable, financially, management, et cetera. Do you believe there will be a reduction in the supplier base in general?
I definitely think there'll be a reduction in the supplier base. You look at all the retailers, and we saw J. Crew and Madewell go bankrupt today. JCPenney's and Neiman Marcus are talking about filing, and I think there's going to be a host of other ones. People who have retailers who have weak balance sheets will go bankrupt, and where are their biggest source of payables are to those merchandise suppliers. So a lot of these, the big ones will survive, but there's a lot of it's a small, basically fragmented supply chain out there, and I think that a lot of these little guys will go under. It's inevitable.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, it's just a reality of this new world we're living in. Navjit, this is for you. COVID has led to the acceleration of e-commerce spend, which in turn will likely lead to higher returns. Can you discuss some best practices for reducing returns? What are some key data points that can help my retailing business reduce returns?
Well, in fact, even before COVID, through some of our surveys, what we found was there is at least 65% of returns that can be controlled by the retailer, meaning they're not driven by a consumer's try on at home policy, which really means 65% could be either due to your product quality, the fit, the delivery, the customer service, or any of those other reasons which typically get overlooked. And let me give you a small example, right? let's say let's say a customer is complaining about a given style on your website. And if you were able to take an action on that one style, and whether it meant changing the copy on the site or the image or whatever it was, right? And that educated the customer in a better fashion to keep the product, that would actually reduce return for that one style. Now, at any given point in time, you may have hundreds or even thousands of active styles. So it's humanly impossible to do it without the right technology, but it can be done.
Yeah, actually, Navjit, that's a very good point, because we've seen certain, in the analysis I did in my prior job, we found certain styles were driving a high percentage of returns, and there was nothing wrong with the style. It just happened to be the run small or run large. And just by simply changing the copy to tell the customer, this runs smaller, this, runs large, size down maybe, we were able to reduce the returns. So those are just some small examples, but you're right, you can't do that at scale unless you have technology.
We have seen, Mike, some D2C companies, I think, have done a great job, kind of really building almost more of a community where their customers post pictures or talk about this exact idea. So it's consumer driven, right? This runs big, this runs small, some cases, right? The customer says, I buy it in these two sizes, which is not what you want to hear as a retailer. But, we do see kind of this kind of idea of bringing in the community, which could also ultimately help reduce returns. So it's a great point. All right, Mike, as a follow-up to the supplier question, as retailers move production around and as suppliers struggle to remain open, do you feel product quality and sustainability issues will be minimized?
I think product quality is going to be somewhat of a challenge, because obviously as there's financial strains put on a lot of these suppliers, they're obviously going to be cutting costs. And there's also, just given the lockdowns in countries like India, Vietnam, and China, there's a lot of delayed shipments. And so now these factories are really trying to push the goods out. So I think the answer is yes, that, product quality will be a challenge. And I think, the key there is to make sure that you actually either use, a service like, BV or somebody, or have field QC people. The last thing you want to do is find out these problems when it's in your DC, because you really don't have the time to deal with it then.
Great point. All right, I'm going to try and reword this question so it's clear. But it seems like, this idea, Mike, because the role you have as the COO, how is the cadence of managing that team kind of during the week, right? When you're not physically together, how is that being impacted? And how is that impacting, kind of the buying process, the planning process, merchandising, and ops?
It's amazing, because you would think working from home, I don't think I've worked so many hours and worked so hard. And, we have constant calls. So, with the team on, ship from store, on the plans. So I think we're actually communicating probably much better and more frequent than we did in the past while we were in the office. And of course, we're focused really on making sure we can deliver these goods to the customers and drive e-commerce sales with stores shut down. How that translates when we open stores and we go back to semi-normal, I don't know. But for right now, I'm actually amazed on how incredibly effective that we've been working from home.
Navjit, can I ask you the same question, reworded from one of our panelists? If we think about, kind of the challenges of you being remote and your potential end customers being remote, how are you kind of driving new customers, and also just how are you communicating any changes, to your own business to existing customers?
Well, I think I should thank Zoom for it, and all of us should. That's really changed the whole remote working paradigm. And it's not just working and communicating internally within the organization, but it's communicating, whether it is with our customers, our prospects, our investors, you name it. And you know what? Everybody is getting used to this new normal of interacting with each other. And, in some cases in the past, we may not have seen some people or, not talk to them live like we are doing right now, but I think Zoom has made it so easy. And in fact, I do see that some of the returns problem down the road, especially in the hard goods, furniture, etc., leveraging a technology like Zoom when a retailer can interact with a consumer, that may definitely impact the, the keep score or having customer more satisfied with the product that they received rather than shipping it back.
Yeah, it's a great point. All right, many more questions. We'll get through as many as we can, and then I'll send these to you guys afterwards. As more sales moved online, have you implemented new strategies to drive traffic and increase conversion rates? I assume this is for you, Mike.
Actually, I mean, we've increased our digital marketing. I wouldn't say, but the return we're getting is huge. I think a lot of it's just organic traffic that are coming, and I wouldn't say we're doing anything markedly different. We're just seeing a lot more traffic coming, and conversion rates are actually quite good. And we're not being overly promotional. I mean, we are being promotional, but I wouldn't say that it's more promotional than we have done in the past. So overall, I think you have a lot of people sitting at home, and government stimulus has given people some purchasing power, and they need to do something with their time.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But Mike, do you think that's a short-term cannibalization because the stores are closed right now?
I think it is a short-term cannibalization, but I think what really remains to be seen is how much will this change people's purchasing behavior? Because a lot of people, I think, maybe preferred to go to malls, but now that this has happened, people who maybe weren't frequent e-commerce shoppers may have been converted. So I expect this trend to continue. But I think one of the biggest probably concerns I have is that if you look at FedEx and UPS and the Postal Service, all of them are actually suffering problems in their network and financial issues, just because the mix has changed. Their mix has changed from moving large, B2B type shipments to stores, which are very profitable, to postal injection like SurePost and SmartPost, which is less profitable. And FedEx is already showing strains in their network, and they're missing SLAs and putting limits on a number of packages that retailers can ship. And UPS, I don't know, they had their earnings last week, and their stock was actually beat up because of the revenue per package was down. So I think that's another big concern out there on the horizon.
So this one is for you, Navjit. We are an e-commerce company. How can Newmine help us reduce returns?
Well, we can help you better understand your data in near real time and tell you exactly. So, underlying concept that we have is what we call a keep score, and our technology can leverage your data, your reviews, etc., to really help you understand what are the best performing products which are being kept across the board. So it makes not only analysis easier, but in fact we prescribe actions to correct or rectify issues. More than happy to give you a demo.
Great. All right, and then the last question, I'm going to leave it with this and we'll stick to our 45 minutes. Mike, are you seeing a big increase in customer returns in March and April? Good question. Also, are there more customer inbound inquiries about delivery and shipping?
We have not seen a big increase in returns. And like I said earlier, I think when stores open, because traditionally we've seen a large number of e-commerce returns be made in store because of convenience. And the other aspect, if you want a new size, you can go try it on in the store. So I think when the stores open, we'll have to see. But just from a pure e-com perspective, they haven't increased markedly. And what was the second part of it?
Let's see. The second part, also, are there more customer inbound inquiries about delivery and shipping?
Well, of course. I mean, with the huge increase in demand, the SLAs have been probably a little bit more relaxed. I think customers realize that, even when you go on Amazon's site, they tell you for, certain items, they always tell you it's going to take longer, then you get emails later on that it's going to be shorter. So I think, that's kind of set the tempo for customers. I think a lot of them understand that it might take longer just given the situation. So while I'd say we have seen some inquiries, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a huge increase.
Okay. With that, Navjit, do you want to share any kind of final thoughts in terms of how retailers can navigate this very challenging time?
Deborah, all I can say is may the force be with you.
With that, I think we're gonna leave it there. It's too good. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Navjit. This is great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.